Now, in introducing the audio summaries of the magazine, we had one thing in mind. We thought there are some listeners here who probably appreciate audio content as opposed to written content. So we thought let's have summaries of the magazine, not of the whole magazine, because we don't want to make our subscribers feel like we're giving away their product for free, but just make highlights available for those of you who are uh, audio oriented. And then if you like what you hear, maybe you can subscribe and engage a lot more with us. So that's the purpose of this audio podcast. The second thing I wanted to mention was the idea that we're doing this in 3-month periods. So you have your Jan, February, March, which was completed, then you have April, May, June. So this is the June issue, so this is the second quarter, so this is the last piece of the second quarter. The third quarter begins next month. So as I said before, we covered a section on intellectual property. We wanted to compare what you have for mining in terms of cryptocurrency in general, as opposed to mining as we've come to know it. Our Founders Freedom collaboration also continues, and this time we're talking about governance and the purpose of building businesses that can run in your absence. And then the fourth part is a conversation I had with a friend of mine where he advised me, or he was looking for laptops for engineers in 2024. So this is a piece by Digital Trends, an author called Albert Brasili. And Albert writes about the 5 best laptops for engineers in 2024. So we'll give you what Digital Trends views as these laptops and what they measure, how they use to, what tools they use to measure these laptops, and why they believe they're the best laptops for engineers. The first section, of course, is our service that we're offering for those who want to learn web design. Of course, we're thinking the course would last about 2 weeks of intense work. I'm thinking maybe 8 hours a day. If you have your own laptops, that will be suitable or the best option for you. So we welcome you to come and join us for that. You can contact us and we can talk about the pricing for this service. If it works out the way we've planned it, then you get a free laptop. Of course, the price of the service will be inclusive of the laptop and software and all those other things that you're going to need. I suspect also that part of the pricing would include a free domain, which we pay for, which allows you to start building and probably earning from your web design projects and web hosting projects. In terms of the contents, I already mentioned those: intellectual property. I call the second part the Battle of the Miners, and then we have a section on faith, a section on my restaurant reviews. And then I didn't mention this, but I think there was something about a cocktail. We'll correct that as we proceed. Now, for the intellectual property course, I thought it was really important to answer a question that was shared on one of the sites which I follow. The person who is a founder was interested in how intellectual property applies in the IT sector. So the first thing I thought was necessary was to describe a course which I took, which is one of the most impactful courses I've taken ever since my return to the continent. It was a course by Harvard Hale, so on copyright law. Starts off with 4 theories of copyright, then goes on to, I suppose I thought it was necessary to mention why these 4 theories are important, because they'll help you understand how your country is thinking in terms of the application of either civil law or common law. And these theories really define how your law system will be functioning as it relates to cases with intellectual property. So this first week was called the Foundations of Copyright Law. Second week was Fairness and Personality Theory. Now those 2 are theories of intellectual property. or theories of copyright. The third week was the subject matter of copyright, which was describing what copyright covers. Then we had welfare theory, then the subject of ownership or authorship, described or split up between joint ownership, sole ownership, and works for hire. Then there's a section for the 6th week called the mechanics of copyright, which talks about the decline of formalities and duration. How long does your protection last? When does your protected work fall into the public domain, and what does that mean? Week 7 was about the right to reproduce and modify. What does reproduction mean? What does improper appropriation mean? Then week 8 was about the right to distribute, perform, and display. What does distribution mean? Public performance, and then there are exceptions and limitations. Week 9 was about the doctrine of fair use and misuse. And of course, for each of these weeks and each of these specific parts of the course, there were a set of laws that were described or cases that were used to illustrate the importance of each of these principles, whether it's misuse, whether it's fair use, whether it's distribution, performance, or display, modification, as well as the theories. Which theory was abused in which country, in which case, or rather, which country came in, and how did the doctrine that country was apply to a certain case that was controversial, that was used to decide the judgment used by the courts. Then we have cultural theory. Then we have a supplements to copyright, secondary liability, and para-copyright. That was week 8. And then they talked about in week 12 remedies. So that's damages, equitable relief, and criminal penalties. The next section in the intellectual property discussion was exploration of intellectual property from a hub manager and patent attorney. That was for South Africa. Then went into Tanzania with an author called Jumanne Mtabilike. Met him briefly, but of course also purchased his book, so I discussed his book and why it's important, some of his ideas. Then we looked at Uganda and Kenya in light of the manuals that both countries produced. I suggested and I talked about a movie that illustrates the importance of copyrights with regards to software. This was from Netflix. Then we probably at some later time I'm going to have an opportunity to bring in another country, which this time is going to be Tanzania, because I found a law firm, Breakthrough Attorneys, which collaborated with the Tanzania Startup Association to come up with a brief or like a summary of important ideas or documents regarding intellectual property in the country and what Tanzania uses as its approach. So that one will probably feature in September, October parts of the magazine. And it will be a continuation or an addition to what we've published in the month of June. Then we get into the part where we talk about founders' freedom, where you're making a choice between a board of directors or a board of advisors. I may have made a mistake in my table of contents, because I believe that in the heading of the table of contents I featured the heading of last month or the month before June, that was May 2024. I featured the topic that I was going to discuss in the June piece, which is why when you go back to the table of contents, you'll find I talked about using governance structures to build businesses that can run in your absence, while in the table of contents and in the section here on page page 8, I talked about the board of advisors versus the board of directors, so that's a mistake on my part. Read through that if you want to understand what leadership means at each different level. We also shared bits and pieces about the 2 publications that I created from Dad's writings: the Survival Kit for Communication, a glossary of terms and acronyms, technical terms and acronyms. We also share our costs for subscription, both print and online. We also share some of our services for the podcast, and then also talk about what it costs to have an ad in our magazine. Also of note, of course, is our web design and web hosting costs. Some of these have changed, but these are reflections of what we were charging in the past, and some of those charges have been adjusted to factor in the changes in the economy. Then we, of course, have our approach to web design, which is summarized as discussion, design, deployment, and debugging. And you might find this interesting if you, and I'd be interested in finding out what approach you normally use with your clients. But I find this very useful. It contains it's made up of 4 Ds, and I find this effective. In one of my podcasts, I've shared with you some of the ideas I use when I'm hosting my web design projects, so you might also find that useful. In the next section, I'll talk about the part of the magazine described as the Battle of the Miners. Welcome back. Nicholas Kianda here for Intersection Magazine podcast and Intersection Magazine, both the publisher and the author of the podcast and the magazine. So in this section, I'm talking about a piece that I call the Battle of the Miners, and this is really an extension of a part where we normally write about a comparison of 2 subjects, or a subject looked at in the eyes of two major players. So here, I'm really interested in looking at what it means to be mining physically as opposed to mining cryptocurrencies. What are the costs for each? What are the benefits? And I suppose I was interested in finding out if we're being distracted by this certain push for crypto mining as opposed to mining literal resources that are worth a lot more. Of course, there's a subject you can talk about in terms of how much it costs to mine crypto, whether you're using proof of stake or proof of work. And those are discussions that people that are into the crypto mining space can help us with. So that's at the heart of this discussion. We talk about some countries where resources are being mined and exploited by foreign companies whose headquarters are not in the countries where the mining is taking place. We talk about the Democratic Republic of Congo, who owns what. We talk about development and mining. Of course, those who are interested in smartphones will be interested in the kind of minerals that are mined that are related to the cell phone industry. So those are all discussions that are open. Now, in the film recommendation, just as I mentioned, I wanted to expand a little bit on the subject of intellectual property and copyright. So I recommend that you look at or you watch the series. I believe it has just 4 parts. $1 Billion Code. It's by Netflix, and it's really a very well-written expression of the challenges that many of us will face when we're dealing with the subject of protecting our software. For book recommendation, there were 2 books exploring Kenya and Uganda. One is the Innovator's Guidebook. That one's created by a team in Kenya, and then the Innovate and Protect, the management toolkit for Uganda. So that was formed the basis of my discussion in the book recommendation. Now, then of course you have the 4 parts of the magazine, or 4 issues, where I talk about what we've been looking at the last 4 months. Have a look at that if you want to know what you should be looking at, what you should be rereading, what you should be purchasing in case you haven't purchased that yet. Then we'll go to the digital trends piece by Albert Basili, in which we compare 4 of the best laptops for engineers. They first compare them based on what chips they have, the chipset. So those of you who are investing in hardware or investing in stocks would be interested in some of these ideas. Who's building chips, what kind of chips are they? Are they RTXs? Are they M3 chips for Apple? Are they Core i7s? Is it Intel that's producing the processor chips? Is it who's responsible for the DDRs and all that kind of stuff? In terms of the 4 or the 5 major laptops, it was an Asus, an M3 MacBook, Samsung Galaxy, LG Gram 17, and a Legion Pro 5. They compared battery life, they compared DDR, they compared processing power, the chips, as I mentioned before, the screen size, the weight, the price. So that's might interest those of you who want to buy laptops as engineers, or maybe usually you'll find that if you're an engineer, you might appreciate the same specifications if you're a gamer, if you're creating games or working in games. We also, of course, have our poem. This is an exploration of micropoetry, introduced by some users that I found online. You might also appreciate that. This is a combination as well of some of my history in places that I've visited. Instead of giving you the story, I'll just write poetry so that it has a bit of a mystique around it. So those of you who are familiar with those parts of my history will appreciate the poetry. Or maybe at a later point in time, if we are able to put together a book, then we can connect the poetry to certain sections of the book, and it will make a lot more sense. That is it for June 2024, and that is it for the second quarter of the year 2024. Next, I'll present July, which is the first month of the third quarter. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Those of you who would like to participate or have a conversation with us are free to do so. Engage us on our socials, direct message us, and we'll be in touch. We'd love to talk to you and maybe host your advertisements and help you with your projects. We also run supplements. Rates for advertising the magazine are affordable. You can sponsor an episode, or you can sponsor a season where we have a theme where we'll discuss a subject of your interest, thereby giving you a much larger audience. Once again, thank you for subscribing, thank you for listening, and have a good one.
Intersection Magazine Podcast.